Hello, this is Nolan Bentley. I am doing a review key for the plant test. Just a quick reminder, in case you haven't used one of these before, please don't watch the whole thing because you're just going to hear me talk to myself, and it gets a little awkward at times, and you hear some really bad jokes. I wouldn't recommend it. Flip to the section you need to. Check your answer first, I guess. Check your answer first, then check to the section only if you need to really go there. I wouldn't waste time listening to me talk through the whole thing because you need to focus your studies and you need to get prepared for your test tomorrow, Tuesday, which would be April 8th. Okay, so first question is a cladogram. Cladograms are a, simplified version of common ancestry between different organisms. We can see here that our common ancestor of plants is green algae. Turns out that's very important. That's just straight up a test question. Common ancestor of plants, green algae. In particular, multicellular algae. Because at some point, multicellularness has evolved, a thick cuticle allowing the plant to protect itself from drying out has evolved, all these other things. And all the things that we label plants are as demonstrated on here, all have those properties. So hornworts, liverworts, mosses, and so on all have those properties because they came after this. On the other hand, green algae, it does not have a cuticle. It is not multicellular Gmetangia. It's a hard word to say. Continuing. The liverworts. Alright, nothing new has happened here. Mosses, nothing new has happened. Bam! Evolution of dominant sporophyte and vascular tissue. And this vascular tissue is the easy to see difference. Club mosses, ferns, gymnosperms, angiosperms, they all have vascular tissue. On the other hand, everything that came before that evolution has branched off already. Mosses, they don't have vascular tissue. Liverworts, nope. Hornworts, no. Finally, we have seeds up here, and so we can see that ferns are not considered to have seeds. They use something called spores, as do all the rest on the left side of the graph. On the other hand, gymnosperms and angiosperms do have seeds. Okay, so let's go answer some questions. What is the organism from which plants evolved? Well, that's going to be algae. And if you would just jump to this question, what you're going to find out is I went through the picture beforehand, so go back to that picture. Okay, that was weird. What separates mosses from club mosses? The evolution of dominant sporophyte, which has to do with their life cycle and really wasn't stressed during class. But evolution of dominant sporophyte occurred for club mosses. Remember, you can't just tell me a phrase, you have to tell me what it means. And club mosses also have vascular tissue. Mosses don't. They have to just stay wet. They can't really transport fluid from their root-like organs to their surroundings. It doesn't work for them that way. It looks like I'm having a few formatting issues. I think I'll just have to kind of fix it as we go along. Which plants use seeds as part of their reproduction? Well, you come up here, you're like gymnosperms is after seeds. Angiosperms are also after seeds. Everything else connected on here came before seeds, or branched out and went a different path than our seed-producing organisms. So that would be gymnosperms, which means naked seed, and angiosperms, which means contained seeds. Sorry, misspelled. Sperms. This should have been sperms. There we go. Gymnosperms, angiosperms. Alright, so 4 characteristics that all plants have in common. There's, of course, many more characteristics than just 4. There's 4 we talked about in class, though. Multicellularness is a big one. Multicellularness is a big one simply because there's so many types of algae that kind of look like plants. They're pretty much the only things that really look like plants. It's also should be noted that all plants are also photosynthetic, or autotrophic if you want to use a less um, slightly more ambiguous word, so unclear. But they're photosynthetic. That means they make food from light. That distinguishes them from, say, fungi and animals. They're multicellular, photosynthetic, and then there's a few kind of detail things. Cellulose in the cell walls. I believe that helps differentiate them from certain types of algae again. And they have chlorophyll, which will help distinguish them from types of algae that did not evolve chlorophyll. There are red algae, gold algae, there's lots of different kinds of algae, and the names change depending on who you're talking to. Alright, so moving on. What do gymnosperms use for reproduction? Gymnosperms are the naked seeds, and the naked seeds are produced by cones. Not those others. Angiosperms produced by flowers. The non-vascular and the vascular seedless plants both produced by spores, so that would be ferns and more primitive. Mitosis, things don't reproduce. You can have somatic cells, so non-sex cells, that reproduce through mitosis, but bacteria do something called binary fusion, which is kind of a type of mitosis. But for gymnosperms, we're going to say cones. For angiosperms, on the other hand, we're going to say flowers. That's the big one. Angiosperms are the most successful for various reasons, primarily because of the lots of uses of the fruiting container. That's why it's called angiosperm, which means contained seed. So the container can be modified into lots of different shapes and lots of different forms. Everything from an apple to winged seeds. The angio in angiosperm is quite useful. The fruit is quite useful. Okay, so K classes, you're now going to see there's a little bit of a difference between your version of the test review and the L version of the test review. I will go through the correct answers, and then I will talk about a few more details that are primarily aimed for the K classes. So what is the function of vascular tissue in plants? Well, here's the thing. You have a vascular tissue. Your heart, your arteries, your veins, your capillaries, that's your vascular tissue. You even have a second one that's called the lymphatic system, but you don't know much about that one yet, so we'll wait till body systems. But the vascular tissue in plants does a very similar job, but it's not blood. The vascular tissue in plants is what you might think. It's mostly water, food in the form of sugar solutions and complex carbohydrates, and minerals flowing through the plant. And that's what the vascular tissue in a plant carries. So we have xylem and phloem are the two components we've talked about, which make up the vascular bundle. And we'll talk a little bit more about those later, I believe. Well, xylem zips the water up the plant. Phloem, food flows down. So that's how I remember. Xylem zips the water up. Phloem flows the food down. Apparently that's an old one. My wife remembers that from high school. So apparently it's a good one too, because my wife remembers from high school. Describe the difference between xylem and phloem. That's what I just went through. Xylem moves water up. Phloem moves water and sugar toward the roots. And if I had to say anything about this one, I would say that the xylem moves water and minerals up. So things that were dissolved in the soil. I might even say minerals and nutrients. So there's a lot more than just water in the soil. That's why if you just drank from a puddle, it would taste kind of funny. Well, the plants need that those funny tasting chemicals in there. They use them to build stuff. Remember, they kind of are the root of all our complex chemicals. They're the first ones to start putting things together. All the rest of these, water moves towards the roots. No, water is going to go through the xylem up the plant. It'll come back, some of it will come back down through the phloem. But again, the phloem is going to flow down the plant towards the roots and feed the roots. The xylem moves water from the leaves to the roots. Again, we're going the wrong way. Phloem carries the waste product out of the plant. It can, but that's not really something we've talked about, and it's probably not even the primary way. Xylem moves carbon dioxide and phloem moves oxygen. Well, actually, phloem probably is the primary way. Anyway, sorry, I'm mumbling. Xylem moves carbon dioxide and phloem moves oxygen. Stick with the water and minerals moving up, water and sugar moving towards the roots. It's a good thing. It's what we need you to remember. Gases go in and out, by the way, through the stomata, which are mostly direct contact sources of these gases. What is the dermal tissue of the plant? Well, it's the same as your dermal tissue. It's the skin of the plant. Of course, their skin is a little bit different from ours. So if I just say the outer tissue, that's true. Your outer tissue is also your dermal tissue. For plants, it helps them regulate homeostasis. Well, for us, it helps us regulate homeostasis. For plants, it helps them keep their water in. For you, it helps you keep your water in. For plants, it lets them breathe. For us, not so much. Yes, definitely still involved with breathing, but just a much more complicated way because we have that whole lung system. But on the inside, it's still very similar to dermal tissue. All right, so the outer layer of tissue that helps regulate homeostasis. There we go. In plants, the primary reason why it helps them regulate homeostasis is by having the stomata open and close to bring in more or less, to bring in or to let out oxygen, carbon dioxide, and water vapor. And if you'll remember, water vapor is pretty much let out here. Well, oxygen, carbon dioxide, depending on the time of day, will go either way. All right, tissue found in the embryo. No, it's going to be on the outside. Sure, there might be some dermal tissue, but that's some weird dermal tissue. We're looking at mostly the outer layer, generally involved in photosynthesis, helping regulate homeostasis through the stomata. All right, what is the function of guard cells? Well, if you don't know what they are, those are the cells that form the stomata. They open and close. They open by losing water, causing them to slightly shrivel. That causes a slight gap to open in the surface of the leaf. By absorbing water, they will cause themselves to close, plugging that hole up and not allowing any gases or water vapor, which is a gas, to get in or out. So they will regulate gas exchange through the roots. No. Let's add that. That form the stomata on the leaves, not in the roots. Mostly on the underside of the leaf, actually, where there's not much light to evaporate too much water. They regulate gas exchange through the roots. No. Regulate water loss through the roots. No. Regulate gas exchange through the stomata. Yes. And that's it. Okay. Let's see. B. Oh, I'm holding shift. You may be tempted to pick regulate osmosis, but osmosis is the diffusion of water through a membrane, not gases. So that's a liquid water. So that's definitely a tricky one there. How do the stomata help maintain homeostasis? I talked about that in number 7, if you want to go back. But the way they do that is by letting in the proper amount of carbon dioxide and oxygen, or letting out the proper amount of carbon dioxide and oxygen. And they also allow the plant to get water. Get rid of water. By bringing the water up from the root into the leaves through the xylem, they're actually able to then pump phloem back down. It's kind of exchanged that way, and it's very important in order to help the plants move stuff around and to get enough water. So they will transpire, is what B is describing, and it will regulate the amount of gases going in and out. So which plant's system is responsible for obtaining water? The shoots are the growing leaf surface. Well, it depends on what your definition of is. I think in this case they're talking more about the stem, so let's just go with the stems or vascular tissue. Not really the proper definition, but that's what most people mean by it. Leaves is the mostly photosynthetic and regulatory structures, so mostly photosynthetic. Regulates water by losing it. So they regulate water by losing water through evaporation. So that one's close, but not the right answer. It's where it's lost, so it's like the opposite. Which actually does slightly help it, well, which does significantly help it obtain more water. On the other hand, the roots will reach out and find water. Depending upon where the water is, they will absorb water in different ways. So for example, if you're like in a temperate forest, there's lots of stuff all around you, but you get a pretty good amount of water, you can grow, or plants can grow their roots really deep and hopefully tap into like groundwater, so basically puddles underneath the ground where it'll stay for a while. However, in the desert, you don't have much of that. That's why you don't see people building wells out in the desert. There's simply not a lot of water deep underground, because most of the time in the desert, when it rains, the water's just evaporated fairly quickly before it can sink too deeply. So in the desert, plants will spread their roots out all around to absorb more water. Absorb water. They also will need to obtain nutrients this way. And so some plants, especially ones that like live on top of things, like air plants, which grow on top of the trees, will actually mostly just use their roots to absorb nutrients from dying materials around them, while they'll tend to just get water from condensation and by staying nice and small, where it's kind of easy to stay wet in a moist environment. A flower, on the other hand, is a reproductive organ. That's its job. It reproduces the plant. Leaves contain a high number of chloroplasts in most plants. Oh, I didn't actually write the answer. Sorry. Roots. Getting water. There we go. Leaves contain a high number of chloroplasts in most plants. That is what makes them green. Based on that observation, what can you conclude about the main job of leaves? Of course, leaves are a complicated structure. They have many different jobs. But this one's talking about the high number of chloroplasts. That means we're talking about photosynthesis. So what you need to put is whatever's about photosynthesis. So that would be sugar production. One of the products that we refer to as food oftentimes is the actual product of a photosynthesis, which is glucose, which is a type of monosaccharide or simple sugar. So one of the ways we could possibly say it is sugar production. We could have also said glucose production, monosaccharide production, carbohydrate production. There's lots of different words. If you remember back to that biomolecules unit, there was lots of words for these different chemicals. So make sure you know them. 1 second. Number 12, it asks, why is it difficult for most plants to survive near the ocean? Well, the reason why is because whenever you have salt water, like in the ocean, a cell that does not have much salt in it will constantly have its water attracted to the outside of the cell through the process known as osmosis. The way I like to remember is osmosis causes water to be attracted to where there is more stuff to dissolve. Now, that's not the best definition. The better way to say it, and we're kind of near the end of the year, so why not, is to where there is a greater concentration of stuff to dissolve. So it's not just where there's more, it's where there is more stuff close together. That's what concentration means. It's how much stuff in a certain amount of space. So salt water, which has a lot of stuff dissolved in it, is going to be very attractive to pure water. And so pure water will try to go towards it. Well, if the pure water is in the cell, that means that cell is about to lose some water. So plants don't like that. Plants are actually supported by their by the pressure of water pushing into their cells. Plant cells, let's try that, are supported by water moving into the cell through osmosis. This means if that in the ocean, water will move out of the cell, making the plant cell limp. It becomes like a unblown up balloon. It simply starts to shrivel up. That changes the shape, and as we know in biology, it's all about the shape. Not to mention, it changes the concentration of chemicals inside the cell, and that's probably more the main problem with this, is that the cell is made to work at a certain concentration of dissolved substances. Well, during osmosis, that's changing that concentration by moving too much water in or too much water out. Plants are pretty good at dealing with too much water in. That's actually how they support themselves. But too much water moving out makes them limp and changes their shape and makes them not very good. So that's actually going to cause them to become all limp. Hopefully you saw that in the lab at some point. So that's called osmosis. It causes too much water to be absorbed by the plant. No, it causes too little water to be absorbed by the plant due to the salt. Yes. The plant won't be able to obtain stuff because the water would rather stay outside where all that lovely dissolved stuff is. Alright, let's delete that and move it up a little bit so I don't mess up the spacing too much. What effect would osmosis have on a plant if you watered it with Kool-Aid, which is sugary, instead of regular water? Well, sugary liquids are going to attract water to those sugar molecules. And so the plant would have a hard time pulling that water into its cell as it needs to do. And the water would actually move out of the cell more often than the cell can move some in. So in other words, we can summarize that by saying the plant will not be able to absorb enough water, causing it to shrivel, much like our egg did a long time ago when we planted in that sugar solution of cornstarch and water, or corn syrup and water. What effect would adding a fertilizer high in nitrogen have on a plant, and why? Well, what you have to know about that is nitrogen is used to make proteins and nucleic acids. It's specifically important because of proteins, which they need a lot more of than nucleic acids. So they will increase growth due to proteins being made, probably. Too much protein, of course, like anything in life, too much is generally bad, which means the plant would probably just die. please don't go home and just be like, look, Mom, I can make our plant grow, and just like pour a bottle of Miracle Grow or other fertilizer onto your plants. No, people, you will probably just kill the plants. So don't do that. And fertilizers are not playthings. They are rather potent and strong chemicals and should be treated like so. What type of root system would be best for obtaining surface water? There's a good word right there. Surface water. That's kind of key. After a rain. Small fibrous root or a tap root, like a carrot. And why? Fibrous roots, because they reach deep down in the dirt. Because, you know, deep down, there's all that surface. No. There's not much surface deep down. In fact, there's very little surface. And if you reach deep down, what you can find is maybe puddles that occur in a place that gets lots and lots of rain. Maybe puddles that other plants which didn't have as deep roots can reach. But that's not what's going on here. We're trying to get surface water. So fibrous roots, which I'm going to just underline because, yeah, it's right. It's the only one that doesn't say, well, no. Fibrous roots, because they spread out and stay near the surface, absolutely, that spreading out will enable them to gather more water than they otherwise would. Of course, there's always a trade-off with fibrous roots spreading out. That means, well, you're going to have to be in competition with lots of other things. So if there's already things there, you're going to be competing with them. So that's kind of the trade-off here. Of course, if you're in the desert, there's not a lot of stuff competing with you. So those cacti spread their roots really far away. That brings us to number 16. Which type of root do you think a desert plant would have and why? Well, I think it would have a fibrous root, because the desert does not get much rain. So when it does rain, the plant wants to collect as much as possible in the short amount of time the desert surface. Did I say desert? The desert surface stays wet. That's the goal, is before it evaporates, you want to pull it into the plants. And so if you were trying to wait till it sunk really deep down to get your taproot into it, well, at that point, most of the water probably evaporated. So, yeah, that's not a good strategy there. Now, if you are a desert where there is maybe some interesting geology and there is some deep water, then in those places, yes, a desert plant might grow a taproot. But most of the time, that special geological structure is probably not going to be there. So most of the time, I imagine you're going to see fibrous roots. All right, how does the vascular system help the plant with photosynthesis? Well, I don't need to type well. Photosynthesis requires some chemicals. It requires carbon dioxide. It requires water. Now, the carbon dioxide can be get just by, exposing a cell to the surface. But water isn't always that easy. It's not constantly wet on the surface of the earth. Especially in drier places, the plant really needs to be able to store and move water around. So having tubes which will pull it from the roots to the leaves where photosynthesis takes place is a great adaptation, allowing for larger plants than before vascular systems evolved could have been possible. So photosynthesis requires water. The vascular system allows plants to grow far away from the soil where they find most of their water. And still transport it to the leaves where it is needed. That said, of course, plants also need water for all of their other purposes. Excuse me. Just like us, we also have to get chemicals to our cells, away from our other cells, and that's why we're able to get so big. So again, to grow far away from the soil, well, that's how they're able to get so big. This vascular system generally just allows organisms to get larger by moving liquids around the body. Allows them to be larger in general, for many reasons, for a multitude, even more than just water. Although water is probably the primary thing. So what is the substance produced in a plant that can control the functioning? And I'm sorry, let me say this one more time. Number 17, the vascular system also allows the plant to, once it completes photosynthesis, to put food back down into the roots through the phloem. And so that's very significant too. Those roots aren't doing photosynthesis. So they would starve to death if the plant couldn't feed them. And this is why vascular plants can't grow true roots. Well, they can't feed non-vascular plants can't feed their roots, so they can't grow true roots because those roots would just die from starvation. So it allows, again, more specialization, which generally will allow for larger and larger organisms. So, that said, what is the substance produced in a plant that can control the functioning of other parts of a plant called? Hint, these control tropisms. The chemical is generally just called hormones. It's a chemical messenger. Tells cells what to do. In our bodies, it tells us everything from grow to use up all your energy, like something bad is happening, we need to get out of here, go muscles go, hormone called adrenaline, to the hormones that controlled puberty, to the hormones that controlled your original growth. That's why you're not just a big ball of cells. That's why you developed into a human shape. It's through chemical messages in the form of hormones. Yep. Once we eventually got big enough, we're able to send electrical messages through our nervous system. Not really electricity, but very, very similar, and it uses electrical fields in kind of interesting ways. But that's our nervous system. Plants don't have that. So that's one important thing to remember. Plants are never going to have a nervous system. Well, I don't mean like never in the future. I don't know. That'd be cool. Plants had a nervous system. Perhaps one day, billions of years, or millions of years from now, maybe. Anyways, draw a picture to describe the 3 types of tropisms below. Movement, caused by light. Photo means light. Tropism means a movement. Well, a phototropism is surprisingly a movement caused by light. A okay. And let me just put this in here, or gravitropism is a movement caused by, hope you guessed it, the Earth, hint geo, or gravity. So again, the Earth. By the Earth's gravity. Gotta stick them together there. A thigmotropism, this is a weird one to remember. I just remember T for touch. So, it is a movement caused by touch. And there's so many different types, I can't even specify that for a while. Those, of course, phototropisms. Sunflowers are famous for this because those big, pretty flowers, they grow the sides of the stem at different rates, and this will allow the plant to turn the flower to face the sun. Now, normally they want the leaves to face the sun. Sunflowers have just, with bees, have evolved to face the sun, I guess, probably to make them a bit more attractive to the bees because of the bright coloring or something like that. Geotropism is the primary way that plants will detect which way to grow. So just like in order to get up, you have to go against gravity. Well, plants know that. Of course, plants are pretty good at that right from the start. They send their roots down, they send their shoots up. so their stems up. Thigmotropism is movement caused by touch. And so we saw that with the Venus flytrap. We saw that with the the catching claw cat creeper, or something like that. In the video, we've seen vines that whenever they touch a surface, know to grab onto that surface through various means. And so that is caused by touch. So what is the purpose of phototropism in plants? Well, if you need to face the sun, or you need to grow upwards towards where the light is, phototropism is a great thing to do. So it tells the plant which way to grow and which direction to orient their photosynthetic surfaces. Ooh, that sounds very fancy, but it's really not. It's pretty simple words, besides photosynthetic, but hopefully by now that's not a difficult word for you. So photosynthesis and respiration. Let me just quickly walk you through this graph right here. Photosynthesis is what plants do. They make sugars and oxygen. Oxygen goes out into the environment. The sugars get stored in their body. They do that so that later on, say nighttime, when they can't do photosynthesis, they can still have energy and not starve to death. Well, they do that by doing cellular respiration, consuming their sugars, consuming the surrounding oxygen, and converting them back to water and carbon dioxide. Well, then they use that water and carbon dioxide to do photosynthesis. And then that allows them to produce sugars and oxygen, and they can grow a little bit more, send their roots a little bit deeper, send their leaves a little bit higher. And that allows them to survive and do some cellular respiration to build some molecules and assemble proteins. And then they can produce more water and carbon dioxide as they do that cellular respiration in their mitochondria, for the point. And that water and carbon dioxide then gets put back into carbon compounds in the form of photosynthesis, which occurs in the chloroplasts, and blah, 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 blah. It's a whole cycle, people. Hopefully you got that by now. This is called the carbon cycle. This is the primary biological route we talk about. And that's it. We do photosynthesis, we do cellular respiration, and so on and so forth. So what is required for photosynthesis to occur? Well, we need water and carbon dioxide and light and energy in the form of light. Because whenever we make that sugar and oxygen and do cellular respiration, that light energy will be released. The light energy that was stored during photosynthesis will be released during cellular respiration. Now, while you do glow just a little bit, you've seen that on night vision, you primarily try to use that cellular respiration energy to do useful things. Say, make protein, replicate, do all sorts of very interesting things with that cellular respiration. So they undo each other is the big thing. They are opposites. One undoes the other. That is why whenever we think about the overall process, so hopefully you've realized that plants must do more photosynthesis than they do cellular respiration, because that's how they grow, by doing a little bit more photosynthesis and using those sugars to make their body. Well, what they do use, however, will end up going back into being made into photosynthesis. So they really do undo each other. That's why you breathe out carbon dioxide and water, while plants breathe out oxygen and food. Explain why most plants that live in very hot and sunny environments have small leaves, while shade plants tend to have large leaves. Well, a shade plant is a plant that grows in the shade. And small leaves help conserve water by minimizing transpiration. Large leaves will collect more light And that's pretty much it. Hot environments cause more evaporative water loss, while shaded plants need to collect more light. So that's hopefully what you thought of. Vascular tissue. These are the tubes called xylem and phloem that move liquids around the plant's body, just like our circulatory system. Xylem moves water and nutrients up the plant. Phloem moves water, nutrients, and food down the plant. The xylem needs to move water up so that it's transpired through the leaves for various reasons. I just won't put those in there. There's lots of reasons why the xylem needs to move water up. The food definitely needs to come down the plant to feed the roots, which is one of the more important reasons for why it's moving down. Chloroplasts, and an easy way to remember. So xylem zips up, phloem flows down. So chloroplasts are the structures in cells, the organelles is what we call them, that allow them to perform photosynthesis, contain chlorophyll, that is the pigment inside, mitochondria inside of eukaryotic cells, which includes protists, fungi, animals, and of course plants, who must use that food they made. It doesn't just sit there. Organelles inside of eukaryotic cells, including all of them, all our groups, that use glucose and oxygen to make ATP, which is a chemical energy molecule, and, well, carbon dioxide and water, which is, of course, the opposite of photosynthesis. Okay, I'm sorry. At some point, I switched from the definition of mitochondria to the definition of cellular respiration. The mitochondria perform cellular respiration, which is this process, the use of glucose and oxygen to make ATP, carbon dioxide, and water. So I just changed it to the process where glucose and oxygen make ATP, carbon dioxide, and water. It powers cells. The mitochondria does that process. So it also powers cells. So this is kind of fun because with photosynthesis, I can demonstrate that it truly is the opposite. If I want to make this correct, I can simply take the glucose and oxygen, say that that is what is made. Now, they don't use ATP to do that, no. Carbon dioxide and water are used to do that. By combining them with light energy. This is how plants make food. Now, of course, then they can take that glucose and do all sorts of things with it. They can assemble it into complex carbohydrates. So glucose is a simple carbohydrate. They can assemble it into cellulose, is what their body's made out of, or starch, which is how they store their food. Then an animal comes around and they eat it and do cellular respiration, or the plant simply runs out of light because it's nighttime, and so the plant will use that food that it's already stored. Moss is significant because it does not have a vascular system, a non-vascular plant. It's just one of the more common types of non-vascular plants. The whole group is called Bryophyta. But we just require you to know that mosses are representative of that group. Gymnosperm are cone-bearing plants, which is a type of seed. So pine cones are gymnosperms. Angiosperms are flowering plants, which is a type of seed plant. But their seeds have a fruit covering, so they have a little extra layer of protection for their offspring. And it's one of the reasons why angiosperms have become so successful. In fact, they are currently the dominant form of plant on the earth. So they didn't used to be, but now they are. Fruit is the outer covering on an angiosperm seed. It is made from the ovary of the plant. The stoma. A stoma is a single stomata, the singular form of stomata. They are holes in the surface of plants, primarily the leaves, that allow carbon dioxide and oxygen to go in and out. It actually depends upon what the plant is more doing at the time. Most of the time the plant is doing photosynthesis, and so usually they're allowing carbon dioxide in and oxygen out. Although sometimes when the plant can't do photosynthesis for various reasons, they're letting oxygen in and carbon dioxide out. It just depends on what's going on at the time. They also allow water to evaporate through the process known as transpiration, which helps move water up the xylem. Now, curiously, that also, the fact that water is moving up the xylem also happens to help phloem flow down. But that's through a fairly complicated process that we're not going to go into. All right, guys, I hope that helped. I realized I was a little mumbly on this one, but oh well. So come by if you have any questions. Remember, your test is tomorrow. That is April 8th, 2014. I don't know what year, how long these are going to be up. So, cool. Have a good day. Gravitropism.